Yelling out a special attack is something that we all did on the playground in elementary school, but it's also a pretty common trope in anime. It's usually found in battle shonen where characters have unique or special powers to fight each other with, and it's a very common trope in manga, mainly because when authors need to show off a power, it adds more impact on the page when the character says their attack. This ends up getting translated through to anime when an adaptation eventually happens. And as cheesy as it can be, there is a legitimate reason for it. In a lot of martial arts, you're taught to yell or exhale while doing a move to fully realize your intent to strike. There's also the Japanese idea of kotodama, which refers to the Japanese belief that mystical powers dwell in words and names. This plays a big role in Japanese martial arts like Aikido, which could explain why anime characters shout while attacking. A training arc in an anime refers to a story arc, usually before a big fight, where the main character and sometimes their group train to become stronger. This usually happens in battle shonen and can often lead to major awakenings in the main character. This trope goes beyond the genre though. DBZ has some great training arcs, but so does Haikyuu. However, training arcs are generally reserved for times when the main character are really underleveled or need to get more powerful for a specific reason. They also can vary wildly in how long they last. Sometimes they're just a single episode and sometimes they'll last an entire season. It really depends on the show. Moe is a slang Japanese term and it's used in a lot of contexts, so it's hard to authoritatively define, but Japanese people generally agree that moe as a word refers to feelings of strong affection towards a specific character in anime. The word is technically derived from the Japanese verb moiru, meaning to sprout. I think this refers to a viewer's experience of sprouting affection for that character. Usually, moe is recognized in the anime community as, well, just cute girls, but don't misunderstand. It's not necessarily sexual in nature. While moe as a term used to be everywhere on the internet back in the 2000s and 2010s, with anime like Lucky Star and K-On! Popularizing that trend, it has definitely lost popularity recently. Tsunderes are a trope for an anime character that's initially cold, but eventually warms up and shows their soft side. One of the first tsunderes who defined the character trope would be Lum from Urusei Yatsura, so this trope is actually 40 years old at this point. Tsunderes used to be about character progression, but sometimes modern tsunderes are just in a random state between absolutely loving the protagonist or hating them outright. Now, the actual translation of tsundere can be broken down into two main words. Sun, meaning aloof or off-putting, and dere, meaning infatuation. And while we're here, I might as well explain the other popular dere types. Yandere uses the Japanese word yamu, which means to be sick, and dere. So basically, this is someone who is sick for your love. And they are characterized by extreme actions, resorting to violence to get the relationship they want. But I can fix her, right? Kudere uses the English word cool, but it's in Romanji, so it turns into ku. I swear I'm not being racist, okay? This is the legit definition. Kuderes are people that normally seem emotionless, but will show their feelings around the person they like. Dere basically means someone who doesn't hide their romantic feelings at all, so they generally come off as sweet and flirtatious. Yandere contracts the word danmari, meaning silence, and refers to a character that is normally silent or quiet, but become more talkative around their love interests. Now, there are technically more deres to talk about, but that could be its own video. The confession trope refers to a moment in most romantic anime where one of the characters confesses to another. Now, in America, we don't really say I love you, and it's normal to date for several months before you really say it. But from what I understand, Japan is pretty culturally different. It's actually normal to confess your love pretty early on, sometimes in front of the entire school. In fact, this has an entire word in Japanese dedicated to it, specifically kokuhaku, which literally just translates to confession. Now, confession scenes are usually great and end up being the climax of whatever romance anime they're in, but sometimes that confession can fail. Either this happens because a character rejects the other character, or even worse, the other character mishears the confession, causing a misunderstanding. Now, this is another common trope within a trope, and it's one of my least favorites. Filler arcs refer to a story arc in an anime that isn't directly involved with the main plot. Now, this can be confusing for a lot of people who don't watch anime, but this usually happens because while the anime is airing, the manga that it's being adapted from doesn't have enough chapters to keep going, so they have to fill the screen time with something unrelated. This used to be a much bigger problem back in the day when a lot of anime came out on a weekly basis for years. Sometimes the ending to a story wouldn't be finished, so the animation studio would have to make their own ending. This happened with the original 2003 Fullmetal Alchemist, and in any case, most people view filler as negative, as a lot of the times they have nothing to do with the plot, but it's worth noting that there are interesting filler arcs. It just depends on the show and the specific arc. The overpowered main character is a common trope that has recently emerged, mainly due to power fantasies. Instead of the regular shonen progression of a character, where they get stronger and stronger after more battles, these main characters start off in the story insanely strong, not really having to break a sweat for most battles. Sword Art Online arguably made this trope as popular as it is today, and that's the reason we see it in a lot of isekai. Usually Usually these characters will have black hair because they're supposed to be blank slates for Japanese high school students who can insert themselves into the main character. It is worth noting that sometimes overpowered main characters will still go through a progression arc, but oftentimes it ends up in the same exact scenario. They're going to be overpowered against everybody else. And personally, I'm not a huge fan of the overpowered main character because it removes the tension from fights, but a huge amount of people really enjoy seeing someone just coast through the story, which I think provides a form of escapism for some people. Truck-Kun is a trope wherein the main character gets hit by a moving truck. Now, if you don't watch anime, you might think that's weirdly specific, but trust me, it is very, very common. Usually this happens in Isekai Tensei, which translates to reincarnation to another world. For someone to get reincarnated, they obviously need to die, and since most isekai just copy what someone else already did, they end up using the truck to kill off their main character. It's such a common trope that Konosuba, the parody isekai, made a joke about a slow-moving truck killing the main character just from shock, but personally, I don't think it's any laughing matter. To this day, Truck-Kun probably has the highest kill count in anime, truly devastating KDA if you ask me. Anime characters not having dads is another common trope, and sometimes they just don't have any parents at all. This usually happens in shonen series, where we see their mom sometimes taking care of them, but there's no dad in sight. Usually there's not even an explanation to where the dad went, so I'm guessing they're all in the longest line to get some milk and cigs. Realistically, this is probably just a plot convenience so that the main character has more freedom in the story to go on adventures. I don't really know when this trend exactly started, but even back in 1998, Togashi was writing Hunter x Hunter, where the plot point for Gon was just to find his dad, so clearly it's been going on for a while. The yaoi moment is a trope that involves two male characters getting really intimate with each other out of the blue. Outside of boys love anime, this is usually played off as a gag and not taken seriously by other characters, and it usually ends up with both male characters getting embarrassed or mad. You'll generally see this trope in light-hearted romance or slice of life anime, and obviously in BL anime. Oftentimes the yaoi moment is about teasing a specific female audience named fujoshi, which literally translates to rotten girl. Sometimes an anime will have yaoi moments or subtext throughout the show without committing to their full relationships, which I personally hate. Like, there's no way I'm doing this shit with my homies. Just make the characters gay at that point, come on. But I suspect that this is because gay relationships are still pretty taboo across the world, and especially in Japan. It's also worth noting that the opposite of a yaoi moment would be a yuri moment, where two female characters get intimate out of nowhere, although this is a lot less common. The power of friendship trope is the idea that the main character's friendships is what propels them to victory. Usually this happens when the main character fails to defeat a big villain until he realizes that he has his friends. Sometimes it's more about teamwork and all the characters getting together and working to fight the main boss. Other times the main character literally just gets a stat boost from realizing he has friends. Kinda wish it worked that way in real life. Usually this trope is found in shonen anime, but you can also find it in a lot of different shows, namely sports. Fan service is a trope in anime where a character is usually in a sexually appealing or compromising position. Basically, they are servicing us fans watching the show. It's also worth noting that fan service doesn't always have to be for men, it can also target women as well. Usually this happens in ecchi shows, where the girls in the shows are getting sexualized, and back in the 2010s, panty shots used to be the go-to fan service shot. And it used to be a much more prevalent trope. Practically in every show you could find a moment of fan service, but recently it's definitely died down as anime reaches a much broader audience. The timeskip trope refers to a point in the story where many months or years pass for the characters that the audience never sees, or sometimes we'll see with flashbacks. Usually this ends up with the characters looking pretty different and can be a turning point for some stories. An example of a big time skip would be the original Naruto to Naruto Shippuden, which basically just marks two wholly different series and characters. Another one would be Gurren Lagann, which actually happens in the middle of its 27 episodes in the first season. Personally, time skips are one of my favorite tropes, as they usually shake up the story, making it fresh and more mature. The flashback is probably one of anime's most iconic tropes, where a flashback happens to something that was already shown or to explain what's currently happening. Usually in Western media, we look down on flashbacks, but anime is pretty comfortable using them. Generally, flashbacks are more common in older shows, as when everything was being televised, missing an episode meant you might miss some important character development with no real way of catching up. So a flashback can be used in a hype moment to either remind the viewer of the past or catch up a new viewer who's just tuning in. In modern anime, flashbacks are usually used in bigger moments to build up the dramatic stakes of that scene. Slapstick humor is a trope that involves a person getting beaten up, and since anime is, well, animated, a lot of visual gags end up being impossible in real life. This kind of joke is really common in comedy anime, but is also common outside the genre as well, as a form of comedic relief. A common trope within this trope is smacking someone with a paper fan, known as a harisen, which if you think about it is a literal slapstick, since the fan makes a ton of noise but doesn't really hurt. And that's all the tropes I had time for. Obviously I couldn't go over every single anime trope, I mean there's damn near an infinite amount of them, but I figured I'd cover some of the more interesting or funny ones. Let me know if there are any other anime or manga topics I should explain, and until next time, peace.